There's so much we want to discuss with you, Tom, but let's dive in deeper here on the experience of an international hotel, a top 10 ranked hotel like the Hamad or like the Changi in Singapore, which I've never been to, but I was researching that one as well, with the largest indoor waterfall, indoor rainforests. These are being built as destinations, as fabrics of the cities themselves, as places where you don't even have to have a plane ticket or you don't have to go through security to even visit these terminals. They're actually designed to allow tourists and even locals to come and enjoy, versus the U.S. airport experiences. I mean, just how drastic is the discrepancy between the two? And try to paint the picture, if you can, for our audience.
Sure. So the one thing that all of the, big new international airports have is an abundance of space, right? You go to some U.S. airports, you feel closed in. Even some of the remodeled terminals at JFK, they're very tiny. They're very, low ceilings, tight hallways, no windows. You go to these airports and you have room to stretch out, right? That's the important thing. There's these massive concourses, long natural light beaming in from every direction. Even in Hamad, you couldn't see the windows were obscured by some security gates, but you had skylights overhead. So that's the one thing you notice. The second thing is they're basically shopping malls. They want you to buy high-end products because they're a bit cheaper than if you were to buy them at your local mall, because you don't have to pay taxes on them in most cases if you're passing through. So you had shops in Hamad like Hermès or Hublot or I believe Gucci as well. It's like it felt like I was in Beverly Hills on Rodeo Drive, not in the Middle East at an airport. But they're so important, destinations, because these Middle Eastern countries and these foreign countries, they want you to come back. A lot of these airports are transit airports. I don't know the exact statistics, but most of the people passing through these airports, whether it be in the Middle East or Singapore, they might not necessarily be staying there. So the airport is the only way to tell a traveler that's passing through the territory, hey, this is a place you might want to come back on your next trip.
And getting back to the basics here, let's talk about who owns these airports, who's incurring these costs, and just the real basic cost revenue models of these airports, because this is something that I think I'm curious about, and I assume our listeners are as well.
It differs by airport. So in Los Angeles, you have, I believe the name of the owner is Los Angeles World Airports or something like that. And again, it's governmental organizations that run these airports. And but in New York, for example, you have the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. It's a governmental organization. So they own the airports, they operate them, but they'll contract out to, or they'll own the airports, but the terminals will be owned and managed by different companies, right? So in New York, at JFK, for example, Terminal 1 is a consortium of companies that operate the terminal. They control what goes on in there. Terminal 4 is owned by, I believe the company name is the International Air Terminal Company or something along those lines. IAT is the name. They control everything in that terminal. JetBlue has Terminal 5, and so on and so forth. So it really depends on the airport that you're talking about. But then each airport will have its own. It's what they call air service development divisions. So they'll be the ones that reach out to airlines and say, hey, we think that you should start this route. Here's the financial case that we see on our end, and then it's up to the airlines to say, okay, we see the value in this route. We're going to start service to your airport. But they work in tandem. The airports make the case to the airlines, and then the airlines have to, see if the case works for them. And that's how they start service.
It sounds like U.S. airports are slowly starting to become more privately owned or privately funded from the public model, at least overall. And I know in Europe, privatization of airports is more widespread. So given that shift, is that good for travelers? Is that bad for travelers? Will we get better features as a result of continued privatization, do you think?
I think privatization is always a good thing. I think it can only help. The problem is when you get to the real, airports needing hard infrastructure, there's always going to be government involvement. Mm-hmm. So we saw that with the expansion of the upcoming expansion of JFK, mm-hmm. the government, whether it be the state of New York or the federal government, will always split the lion's share of the bill. There's an airport in New Haven, Connecticut, that just got its second airline to fly there. It's a startup called Avelo. They just started flying, and they're pumping in, money into this airport to renovate it. But ultimately, it's the operators and the private companies that will be taking on the bill, and ultimately the airport itself. So privatization is always a good thing, but when you really need the billions of dollars, that's when you're going to need the government to come in. But on the inside of these privately owned terminals, you are seeing improvements that are for the better.
Yeah, and that we saw an example of that with the $8 billion redevelopment of LaGuardia. It was a public-private partnership. Do you think we're going to see more of that and renovating more of these airports domestically in the U.S. so they can compare better to the wonderful international airports we discussed earlier?
I think we're on a great path towards that. LaGuardia was a shining example of what these public-private partnerships can do. New York has famously led the way in, showing how fruitful it can be when we work with private companies. So I think yes, and we're going to see more at LaGuardia itself. Delta is nearing the completion of its terminal renovation, so I think it has to be the way forward. Just because we're already seeing the benefits of that, and we have shining examples of how good it can work.
If you like what you saw and you like what you heard, you can listen to the entire episode of this podcast, Business Casual, anywhere you get your podcasts. And please go ahead and subscribe to the Morning Brew YouTube channel, and go ahead and click on that alarm bell, that thing right there, so you can be alerted anytime there's a new video.